listening to LOA Recon with the Good Vibe coach Jeanette Ma, where we dissect the ins and outs and the art and science of conscious creation, all intended to amp up your manifesting game. Let's have some fun together. So this is a highly personal story, but it is one of my favorite examples of what happens when we release resistance. And it's the one that I share often when clients tell me they can't drop their resistance to what is. There's no way for them to appreciate what's happening. This is the story I tell. All right, this happened a while ago, but it was a time when I was at my absolute heaviest physically. It was the kind of heavy where I didn't get on a scale for I don't know how long. The kind of heavy where I stopped wearing pants altogether, even in the wintertime. It was skirt city, elastic waistband skirts even. And it was the kind of heavy where it was strictly lights out sex. And there were very strict rules about what was allowed to be touched and what was off limits. In fact, one of the things off limits for touching was my belly. It was big and it was round, and I was losing sight of a waist. It wasn't the only thing going on with my body that I didn't like, but it ranked high on the list. I told you this story had major resistance in it. I'm 5'9", and most of my life, I weighed in at I'd say 135 in my early 20s and maybe around 145 in my 30s, my early 30s. And the last time I got on a scale, it was like mid 160s. Can you hear how I whisper that? And that's when I swore off the scale. I was too concerned about where those numbers were headed. I was not doing it. And I eventually got to a weight where I'd have been delighted with 160. That would have been good news again. So I was not in a good place. And I wasn't one of those girls who was happy with her body no matter her weight. I was very particular, very conscious of what was wrong with it, highly critical of it. I always had been, and I realize in hindsight, that's where that criticism led me. That's where that judgment manifested into when you hate your body, you're not going to get good things from it because your body will reflect your vibration. In fact, there was a time in my life, this was when I was younger, but I consciously knew, I was consciously aware of the thought that I would rather be dead than overweight. I won't go into detail where that thought came from, but one of my first jobs after college was in an office with 2 anorexic girls and 1 bulimic girl, and they considered me to be one of them. I did not identify with those labels, but the truth is a person would have been hard-pressed to tell the difference between us. I'm only sharing this to give you an idea of how much resistance I was carrying to my weight. It was a lot. This was not a small deal for me. So here I am, gaining weight at alarming speed, doing things to reverse the problem. I was doing some LOA things even. I was like manifesting size 6. I was doing some things to change what was wrong. And of course, traditional things, doing sensible things. But of course, none of it was working because I was dialed on the problem instead of the solution. Or if anything worked, it was super temporary because I was just in resistance. I wanted this body to be different than it was. And whether your resistance is around your job or your relationship or your financial status, we all know what resistance does. It makes our quote-unquote problems bigger. Whatever we're seeing as a problem, it grows it. And that's what was happening to me. My resistance to my weight was making it bigger. When I finally realized from an LOA perspective what was happening, I knew what I needed to do was to drop the resistance, to stop using manifesting tools to change my weight, but to find a way to make peace with my body, to let it be okay that I weighed what I weighed and looked how I looked. And I had good incentive because I knew if I didn't, things would just get worse. And I did not want that. That not wanting, that's what makes the thing that you don't want happen even faster. No matter what you're doing to prevent it, those actions to prevent it are actually attracting it when you do it from a place of resistance. We all know this. It took me a minute to clue in to it myself. But I eventually did when the problem got bad enough. And then I started the work of loving the unlovable. I started trying to love my body instead of loathe it. I practiced trying to see it in a positive light instead of a critical one. And this was new territory for me. I tried thinking nice thoughts about it instead of hateful thoughts. And it took so much practice. It took a lot of practice. This is not something that happened overnight. This took me even longer than it did to shift my vibration with my crackhead neighbor. But I did have something going for me that made it easier. I had a boyfriend who saw me in a positive light. I think he might have been an ex-boyfriend at the time. I can't remember. But he was a fan of my body. He had nothing but good things to say about her. And he couldn't understand why I was so upset with what was going on. And I couldn't see what he saw, but I sure tried. I practiced trying to see it from his perspective. How could he look at this and like it? Okay, for one, he actually hadn't seen it in a while, but still, he could appreciate it where I couldn't, and I wanted to get on his page. So I practiced seeing myself through his eyes. I practiced being able to touch myself in an appreciative way, the way he would if he were allowed to put his hand on my waist or rest his hand on my belly. And when he complimented me, instead of arguing with him, I just decided to let him be right. Like, I should let him be right. I should try to join him in this thought. I still couldn't see what he saw, and I thought his taste must be very, very wrong, but I practiced letting him be right and letting myself be wrong, at least letting my old opinions be wrong, because I was trying to change those opinions. I mean, maybe he was right after all. And little by little, I started to see it. I started to see how it was beautiful. I even started to see how perfect it was. Even the moles on the insides of my knees that I'd hated ever since I was a teenager, maybe even before then. I used to fantasize about having them cut off. I started to see those moles as beautiful parts of a beautiful me, instead of yet another way that I was wrong. I practiced loving the jiggle in those thighs and the fact that I never felt any space between them. I'd lost that a long time ago. I practiced being okay with arms that weren't toned or muscular. You had to be careful what you were wearing now. I practiced loving those arms. I practiced appreciating the curves that were everywhere. In my big butt, on my big belly, I just became a fan of curves no matter where they were. I learned how to see the beauty when I looked for it long enough, and it took a while. But after a while, it wasn't an effort to appreciate this big fat body. I could genuinely love and appreciate her just as she was. And I realized she'd deserved this love my whole entire life. And I denied it to her because I thought she wasn't good enough. And that was a mistake that I wasn't going to make anymore. I learned how to love her as is, without any reservations. It was a beautiful thing. It was a wonderful page to land on. And I stayed on that page. I wasn't loving her in order to make her change. I wasn't loving her in hopes that she'd get better, because that's not what love is. Love is love, and we all know the difference. Our bodies do too. So I loved up on this body, and I got pretty good at it. I learned how to let my boyfriend touch my belly without flinching. Like I could feel, I loved being, it was easy to appreciate. And I could touch all the parts with appreciation and devotion instead of seeing what I'd seen before. I could see the divinity and the perfection in this physical self that had been there all along. I couldn't believe how blind I was to it. But I wasn't blind anymore. And one day I was in the shower and I was lathering up and my hand passed over my belly and I noticed my belly wasn't round anymore and I was like, where's my round belly? And I ran my hand over it again and I didn't have a belly anymore. I had an abdomen. My round belly was gone. I had a flat belly. I couldn't even believe it. And my response wasn't delight. It wasn't joy. I was actually a little bit mad. I just got used to my round belly. And that made me laugh out loud when I realized my response, that I no longer had a preference for flat or round. Well, I kind of sort of did in that moment. I thought she should be round. That's what I'd gotten used to loving. But I learned how to love my flat belly too. That flat belly that I used to beg universe for. I used to say, okay, I'll learn to love this big butt if I could just have my flat belly back. That's the amazing thing about love. Wherever we flow it, things can't help but get even better. And I'm not saying that flat bellies are better than round ones because I know better than to think I know what's best for this body or anyone's body. I trust our bodies to know. All I have to do with my body, just fuel her with love. And I trust her to do whatever's best for us both. I'm going to stop pretending I know what she should be. You know, this is also why when I loved my house so much, that first house I bought, I loved it so much. I knew I was going to die in that house. I saw myself as a 90-year-old woman dying in that house because I loved that house so much. I never wanted to leave it. And guess what happened? I just kept getting better houses. They just kept getting even better. No matter how much I loved them and didn't want to leave them, they just kept getting even better. And it happens with my work. My work keeps getting even better. It happens when I love the men keep getting even better. And you know what? It works for money. It works for jobs. It works for family members. It works for neighbors, elected officials. It works for everything. In fact, there was a Tut note today that said, it's really, really simple. Love what you do, what you're now doing, and you'll become a magnet for all things good. As if you needed the extra incentive. That's the Tut note. I love that. It really is that simple. In fact, I just wrote a blog post on this. Dang, I forgot the title of it. Yeah, I was talking about how loving my life, just making the commitment to love life. I think I wrote this blog post. I might have imagined it. Maybe it's in draft form. Maybe it was a Facebook post. I don't know. But boy, there's so much power when we tap love. No matter what we're loving. This is the story that I tell when the client tells me they cannot appreciate their job, they cannot love their current financial situation, they can't remember what they liked about their spouse. I tell them, look, if I can love that belly, anything is possible. So don't sell yourself short. And I get that not everyone has a supportive person in their life like I did, that boyfriend who was helping me see what I was unseeable before. Not everyone has a person like that in their life that makes it easier to get there. If you could benefit from a coach, reach out to me and let's chat. My Masters of Creation Circle is an exceptionally affordable way to get private coaching with me. You can find details at mastersofcreationcircle.com or just connect with like-minded folks at Good Vibe University or wherever you can find LOA savvy friends who know what you're capable of even when you don't. I'm getting a little emotional because your life deserves your cooperation in letting it be the best it can be. And that's coming from someone who knows. Lots of love, everyone, and happy manifesting.